This is a lecture on infantile amnesia. We mentioned infantile amnesia earlier on in the course, but we didn't really go into a lot of detail, so we're going into some more detail in this mini lecture. So there are some competing ideas on whether we can remember things right after birth and in the first few years. So you have on the one hand, you have Freud and some modern trauma dissociation theorists, not all of them, but some of them. They posit that early trauma is a cause of pathology, and a subset of those people think that it can be relived and remembered, and indeed it has to be relived in order to heal. For example, in some literature I think we saw together, some dissociative identity disorder theorists have posited that the cause of DID is severe trauma before the age of 7. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, infantile amnesia is the idea that most or all of our memories are lost before the age of 5. And the question is, what does the evidence and the theory tell us about infantile amnesia? Of course, you're going to need to know this if you do get involved in a case with memory from before the age of 5 or something like that. Okay, so let's go into that. Now let's look at a 1984 paper that talks about infantile amnesia. They're talking about why is it that after birth and in infancy most or all memories are lost. And as you can see on screen here, their explanation that they offer for this absence in early memories is that there is a postnatal maturation of a specific neural system, the hippocampal formation, in other words, the area that we know deals with new memories. And it's that development that lies at the root of infantile amnesia. So in this fairly early paper, 1984, they're positing this idea that there's neural growth in the hippocampus and the surrounding area, and that growth and maturation and myelination of the brain area kind of overwrites or erases old memories. Or put another way, the brain system is not developed enough to record early memories either. So maybe a combination of those two things. On 153 of Nadel and Zola Morgan, the paper we were just talking about, they have a table here showing the development of different memory systems. This is something that they say in their paper, that different memory systems develop at different stages. I think this is true in humans as well. This is data and research on the rhesus monkey. So even in the rhesus monkey and in other animals, you see development of memory capacities. So you see spatial discrimination coming at about 45 days, becoming fairly equal to what an adult performance would be at about 45 days after birth. You see object discrimination becoming developed at 4 to 5 months after birth in the monkey. You see object discrimination reversal, which involves a type of memory, coming at 2 years, and you see object learning set coming at about 2 to 3 years. So this gives you an idea of what the Nadel paper is like. It looks at the biology of the development of the hippocampus in one section. It looks at research in animals in another section to explain why certain types of memory are not available to the animal or the person at certain young ages and how they become more available. Now, of course, here you can't really measure declarative memory. This is what we think of as kind of memory that you can see the episodes in your mind's eye. We don't talk about that in a rhesus monkey because you can't measure it in a rhesus monkey. We don't even know if a monkey has the same kind of declarative memory that humans do. But you could see that that kind of detailed memory might come later in the development of a human than these early abilities. Of course, learning is happening in a human infant early on, of course, and that is remembered. So remembering, it's a type of remembering like procedural memory of how to walk and so on. So I'm not saying, nobody's saying that there's no memory going on in infants, but we're saying the specific type of episode memory that's attached to the self, and you can attach it to a year, is not very well stored until age 5 and so on. And even in age 5, it's not very well stored compared to age 18 and so on. And on page 161, they give this brief conclusion to the evidence that they were showing earlier on in the paper. Here on the second paragraph on page 161, they say, this brief review of the development of the hippocampal system establishes that its postnatal neurogenesis continues throughout the period during which infantile amnesia is most prominent in several species. Data from studies of the development of synaptic function as measured physiologically are largely in agreement with this picture. All right, so what they're saying here is there is good evidence in a few different species that the hippocampus carries on creating neurogenesis, is the creation of neurons postnatally, and that may account for infantile amnesia. In other words, the infant is born. As the infant develops, their hippocampus is producing new neurons, and each time those neurons grow and overwrite other neurons, a lot of the early patterns stored in those neurons are lost as growth occurs. So that's the general idea. Now, another major paper in the literature on infantile amnesia is the 1993 article by Mark Howe and Courage in Psychological Bulletin. That is a very important journal, influential journal. And what they conclude here is they review all the different theories about infantile amnesia, and they also add to this, they say, in the context of this review, extant theories of infantile amnesia are shown to falter, and it is concluded that infantile amnesia is a chimera of a previously unexplored relationship between the development of a cognitive sense of self and the personalization of event memory. Okay, so what they're saying here is that the past research has been fine, Nadel's research, for example, but they didn't really focus on human memory that involves, human episodic memory, I should say, that involves relating things to a sense of self. And they're adding to that gap in the literature by proposing the idea that you need to develop a sense of self before you can record memories, autobiographical memories that you have kind of catalogued. You can't really catalog them until you've got a sense of self, because with all autobiographical memories, we relate it to ourselves. So that's the idea. The idea is, yes, there is some development and some growth in the hippocampus. That's true. But what explains episodic memory later on after that could be that humans are waiting for a stronger development of a sense of self, because that is needed to catalog autobiographical memories. All right. And on Howe and Courage's first page, page 305, they talk about some of the past research. So they say that according to a review by Dutcher and Dutcher, 1941, this infantile amnesia spans the first 3.5 years of life. More recent investigators have generally confirmed this average age, although there are others who claim that the actual age of our first recoverable memory is much earlier, and who cite individuals able to recall at least one memory from the age of 2 years. So it's difficult to assess whether those rememberings of around 2 years old are accurate or not, but some people do report that they can remember at around 2 years old. Which of course raises the question of whether, if somebody does report a memory at age 2 or age 1 of severe abuse, whether that is a memory distortion. And it is also the case that not many memories will be laid down before the age of 6 either. On page 306, they go on to say, we argue on both theoretical and empirical grounds that the solution to the problem of infantile amnesia lies not in searching for changes in memory mechanisms themselves, but rather in considering changes that occur in related areas of cognitive functioning. We propose that the most important of these is the maturation of the sense of self, an achievement that is not evident until about 2 years old and is coincident with the offset of infantile amnesia. So they are saying that research shows that your sense of self develops at around 2 years of age. That is also when infantile amnesia, the strong sense of infantile amnesia, seems to fade a little, and then the sense of self development may be the cause of the ability to develop autobiographical memories we're talking about here. So they say autobiographical memory, by definition, is memory for information and events pertaining to the self. Therefore, knowledge of the self is an important entity for characteristics, thoughts, and actions that are separate and distinct from those others, is perhaps a minimum criteria for the existence of autobiographical memory. In other words, what they're saying here is if you don't have a sense of self and you can't relate things that you're seeing to yourself, you cannot record it as autobiographical memory. So that is their kind of addition to the research. Of course, I think both strands of research are good. I think there really is hippocampal changes in the brain in early infancy. That's a good explanation of some aspects of the slow development of memory abilities. And this development of sense of self may be another explanation that is also valid. On page 316, they say, clearly our review has shown that infants from 3 months of age and upward exhibit memory, albeit non-verbal, for events that occurred weeks, months, or even years earlier. We have also shown that preschool children, even 2-year-olds, remember events for considerable periods of time, both non-verbally and verbally. Yes, that is true. If you've ever raised a child or seen a child develop in your family, you probably recognize this, that if you ask a 2-year-old what they can remember from 9 months ago, they often can. And then so it needs to be explained, why can 3-year-olds remember before 2 years old, or why can 2-year-olds remember being 1? And then at age 18, individuals cannot remember being under 2 years old or around 3 years old and under. One set of researchers might say that's because of the continual neurogenesis in the hippocampus, but what Howe and Courage are arguing here is that the sense of self is not developed enough at that age for the autobiographical memory to survive later on. And they conclude on page 321 that we hope that the present review has also provided a sufficient framework for establishing a new agenda of research on the ontology, that means development of early autobiographical memory. In particular, because much of what has been said concerning the relationship between the emergence of cognitive sense of self, autobiographical memory, and the decline of infantile amnesia is based on logic and an observed temporal contiguity among these variables. Future research should endeavor to establish the nature of the causal linkages between these components. Once again, however, a necessary prerequisite for this research will be the development of a more comprehensive measure of self. All right, so as you can see, at this time, they are hypothesizing that the sense of self is a good explanation for the decline of infantile amnesia, and they're saying that future research may be designed to test that hypothesis. So I wouldn't say it was a theory at this stage, more of a hypothesis. And now let's skip forward to more recent research. Let's see what the current ideas are about infantile amnesia. Which of the two theories have survived and are still believed today, right? So one is sense of self, and the other explanation is neurogenesis, all right? So here, this study by Jocelyn and Franklin, they say that the mechanisms underlying this form of infantile amnesia are subject of much debate, They say psychological cognitive theories assert that the ability to maintain detailed declarative-like memories in the long term correlates with the development of language, theory of mind, and or a sense of self. And of course they're talking about Howell's paper there, aren't they? However, the finding that experimental animals also show infantile amnesia suggests that this phenomena cannot be explained fully in purely human terms. They say that biological explanations of infantile amnesia suggest that protracted postnatal development of key brain regions important for memory interferes with stable long-term memory storage, yet they do not clearly specify which particular aspects of brain maturation are causally related to infantile amnesia. Here, we propose that a hypothesis of infantile amnesia that focuses on one specific aspect of postnatal brain development, the continued addition of new neurons to the hippocampus. Infants exhibit high levels of hippocampal neurogenesis and an ability to form lasting memories. All right, so out of all the theories that have come so far, this is the one that is most persuasive to me. Because it does explain why a 3-year-old can remember 2 years old and why a 25-year-old cannot remember being 3 or 2, right? Because there's continued neuron growth from age 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And I think even adults have some neurogenesis in hippocampus, but it's much slower, right? So that might explain memories being lost later on as well. Let's move on and look more at this paper. In their paper, on page 242, they show the graph to demonstrate that infantile amnesia does not have strict boundaries. It's just like a curve where if you look here at 1 year of age, nobody has any memories. 2 years of age, almost nobody has any memories. 3 years of age, it's still very, very low in terms of most people don't have memories of age 3. If you see the axes on the y-axis, it's the number of memories per person. So any average number of memories below 1 means that many people don't have any memories, and some people are reporting memories before that. So even at age 4 and 5, you can see that the average is less than 1 memory per year for a given sample. And the participants were a mixed group of ages. And it's only until you get age 6 where the average number of memories that people have is above 1, right? So you've heard me say that infantile amnesia means that we don't remember much from before age 6. That's kind of true, although the strict definition of infantile amnesia, where there's complete amnesia in almost everybody, is below age 2, right? So and you can see it's not until age 7 that the average person has 1.5 memories per year, for people who are adults. So it's ages 20 to 70. And I assume that this goes up after age 10. But you can see from age 7 to 10, people are starting to have 1.5 memories per year when they recall at age 35 or so. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how unusual it is to have many memories but below age 6. And I hope it clarifies some of the different ways that we were talking about it. Some individuals say infantile amnesia is below age 2. In fact, there's a curve such that it is very rare actually below age, say 5, to have a full 1 memory per year. And it's only age 6 that the average person has 1 memory. As part of Jocelyn's and Franklin's 2012 argument, they give us this figure in figure 4 that shows that in humans and in animals there is evidence of neurogenesis declining with age and memory retention increasing with age, with such a reverse relationship that one may imply that is causing the other. So they say that the neurogenic hypothesis of infantile amnesia, levels of neurogenesis and memory retention are inversely related. The inability to form stable, persistent memories in early life coincides with a period of high neurogenesis, whereas the ability to form stable, persistent memories only emerges at later developmental periods as the rate of neurogenesis declines. Now, I think this makes sense, and they have other graphs to show us. Elsewhere in the paper, Jocelyn and Franklin show that there is a decline in infantile amnesia, but in this graph, they demonstrate that in rats, monkeys, and humans, there is the same type of decline in neurogenesis, right? So you have a lot of neurogenesis in the hippocampus right after birth, and that continues. The neurogenesis continues, but it drastically falls off the rate at which cells are created until you get to very early ages. So by 5 months in rats, most of the neurogenesis has declined to low levels. In monkeys, at about 100 months, the neurogenesis has gone down drastically. And you can see in humans, it's difficult to tell here, but in infancy, the neurogenesis has reduced down to near zero, and it's non-zero after that. So you're still generating cells at your age and at my age, but it's quite low. We're not generating many cells in the hippocampus. Now, to back up their hypothesis that neurogenesis causes infantile amnesia, they created this graph here comparing rats and guinea pigs. Now, those rats have a relatively low gestation period, so that they have a lot of neurogenesis right after birth. Guinea pigs don't have a lot of neurogenesis right after birth because they have long gestation periods, right? Now let's go through it step by step. So look at a graph here. You can see that those rats who are P15, that's 15 days after birth, they are the worst at the retention of this memory. And you can see that those with the highest, the older rats, which are P35, 35 days old, they retain more of the information for longer. So in other words, those with a lot of neurogenesis, those youngest rats, are not retaining things very well compared to older rats who are retaining information longer. Now contrast that with guinea pigs who do not have high neurogenesis in their early life because they have a long gestation period and the neurogenesis has already happened by the time that they're 5 days old. You can see that there are not differences in retention, either whenever the training or the learning is weak training, moderate or strong. There's still no differences between those who are 5 days old, the guinea pigs that are 5 days old, illustrated with P5 here, and those guinea pigs that are 100 days old, illustrated with the P100 here. As you can see, the percent correct on those trials is pretty similar in all different types of trials, whether it be weak, moderate or strong training or learning. So there you have it. Because rats have very high neurogenesis, the youngest rats forget a lot of the information compared to older rats, because older rats do not have high neurogenesis anymore. And in guinea pigs it's different, because both young and older guinea pigs have low neurogenesis. Now back to an article by Mark Howe, but this time very recently in 2019, he does an interesting commentary on the problem of infantile amnesia. And let's pick out some interesting things from this paper. Now, Mark Howe, on page 115 of his paper, does emphasize his theory that he talked about in 1993, of course. He writes that the importance of the self in autobiographical memory is not limited to its genesis and early development, but it is also key throughout the lifespan of an individual. In fact, mnemonic benefits of self-referencing and self-generation have been well established in both the child and adult memory literature for some time. Indeed, for some, the self is the very glue that binds encoded elements together to create a strong and durable trace for autobiographical memory. Right? So he is saying that there's good evidence in adults and children that the stronger your sense of self and that you relate things that happen to you to yourself, you're better at remembering them. So he's saying that's probably important in early childhood too. He's not rejecting neurogenesis out of the picture, but he's saying that you do need a sense of self to start to catalog autobiographical memories. So similar to what he said in 1993. On page 119, Mark Howe goes on to say the idea of neurogenesis as a factor in both adult form forgetting and infantile amnesia certainly makes physiological sense. That is, new neurons overwrite old ones at memory sites, and although this overwriting still preserves some of the structural features corresponding to the original memory, it also substantially changes its contents, particularly memory context. Importantly, however, although neurogenesis is high during infantile amnesia, the fact that forgetting is also high may simply be a correlation. So what he's saying that, yes, there is a relationship in that neurogenesis is very high during infancy and forgetting is very high during infancy, but he thinks it might just be a correlation. I'm not sure I agree, but he would argue that there exists a preference to rewrite memories stored early in life with new, more representative information as experience accrues. So what he's saying is that we rewrite memories every time we remember them from early childhood, and we rewrite them and add context as we go so that the general gist meaning is preserved and our learning is preserved, but we don't really remember the context at which we learnt something. In other words, the episodic memory is lost and overwritten. And Mark Howe says something interesting here in his article, page 119, about stress and trauma. So concerning stress and trauma, although these issues were not dealt with specifically in this special issue, there is evidence that the majority of early memory reports do not involve emotional or traumatic events. Indeed, painful and traumatic experiences early in life, for example, circumcision without anesthetic, often do not translate into declarative memories for those experiences, and behavioral evidence of their persistence often dissipating within a relatively short period of time, right? So there's some evidence of that in that paper. So what he's saying here is that, and maybe we can relate this to claims that some people might have, that they have recalled traumas early in life. So even traumas such as surgery that are painful are not remembered from less than 2 years old. So in other words, the mechanisms in infantile amnesia wipe out everything below age 2, whether it's neurogenesis or not, regardless of there being zero trauma and regardless whether there is some trauma, right? So it's the same for everybody regardless of trauma. So let's summarize what we've learnt today on the subject of infantile amnesia. So as adults, almost nobody remembers anything at age 1 or 2, right? So that, if you see a court case where somebody is remembering traumatic things at age 2 or 1, you can bring up the research for that. But also, very few people remember one thing before the age of 6. Some people do, but it's usually less than one thing per person per year. Then from ages 7 to 10, on average, once you get into your adult life, you remember maybe 1 or 2 things per year for that time period. Now, what's odd about this is that when you are age 4, you can remember a lot of things from when you were age 3, but the point is by the time you become an adult, most of that is lost. So you just retain maybe one thing from age 3, something like that. Some people have no memory of anything at age 3 or age 4. Some people have 1, some people have 2 things. But it averages out as less than 1 before the age of 5, 1 thing per year. And the explanations for this, and I don't know which ones you're most convinced of, is neurogenesis in the hippocampus. That's probably the one that is most convincing me at the moment, because it's something very measurable. The data from animals is quite good. I don't know why you need any other explanation if there's a good explanation in measurable with something that's quite good to measure. But also there's another hypothesis that the sense of self needs to develop before you can store autobiographical memories, and I think that is a fairly good explanation, because we relate things to the self, so you need that to form autobiographical memories. The stronger the sense of self, I guess that would lead to stronger autobiographical memories. So I don't know which is the best explanation, apart from to say there's good evidence for both. I think the evidence for neurogenesis is maybe a little bit stronger, at least more precise in its measurement. But I think, if I were to guess, I think both may be true, neurogenesis and the development of sense of self. But there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I certainly learned a lot myself from putting the lecture together, and I think this is a very valuable gap in knowledge that we need to fill, because a lot of the historic abuse claims are from the period of 7 and under. All right, so the question is, is it possible to recall things accurately from that time? And talking about infantile amnesia in a court report or as an expert witness would really probably help the case and help the jury understand what's true about how common early memories are. Okay, thank you. Bye for now.